It's the Cannon Sports Podcast. On today's episode, we're joined by longtime LA Times prep sports writer, Eric Sondheimer. Welcome in, everybody, to the Cannon Sports Podcast. I'm Phil George. Our guest today is the preeminent prep sports writer in Southern California. He's been on the sports scene in Southern California for more than 40 years, been doing it for the LA Times since 1997. Mr. Eric Sondheimer.
Thank you very much for having me.
Eric, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick?
Well, I'm a Poly High grad in Sun Valley in 1976, and I started covering high school sports for the Daily News, where I went to Cal State Northridge, where I graduated in 1980, and I've been covering high school sports ever since. Of course, I've also done other things. I've covered the NBA championships, a Super Bowl, World Series, but high school sports in Southern California is so unique with so many great athletes that I've never been bored. And when I went to the LA Times in 1997, it just continued my growth as a writer and as a sports journalist.
And we're going to talk about all things related to high school and pro and college sports in Southern California. But first, let's go ahead and talk about your early life and upbringing. So you're a local guy through and through, obviously. Went to high school in the Valley, did graduate from CSUN. So who did you grow up following and cheering for?
Well, I've always wanted to be a sports writer ever since I was cut from the junior high basketball team as a seventh grader, and I wanted to stay involved. And the quickest and most influential way was to join the school newspaper, because I found out that everybody wanted to get their name in the newspaper. So I enjoyed having them ask me questions rather than myself sitting on the bench rooting for somebody else. So that was fun. My first person that I happened to be covering when I started to string was John Elway. Happened to show up at Granada Hills High when his dad was named head football coach at Cal State Northridge. I had no idea this kid was going to be a Hall of Famer, but after I saw him throw, I certainly believed that it would be hard for anybody to throw better than him, and his arm strength was out of this world, and to this day, I still haven't seen anybody throw a football quite like him.
That's amazing. So you broke onto the scene, and one of the first guys that you got to see was a young John Elway.
Right. I felt sorry for all the quarterbacks before and since because they get compared to him. And it was difficult in those early years because, everybody kept saying he's another Elway, and I would shake my head and laugh at it because there was only one Elway. But it was to be able to see somebody so young and develop and watch him grow up at Stanford and then the NFL, it was really positive for me because then I had somebody to compare with who was the best of the best. So all these other people who kept claiming they were good, I would know immediately if they were really good, not just on physical ability, but mental toughness. I mean, he played under Darryl Stroh at Granada Hills, who would really like to yell at people. He would flush the toilet in the locker room one time when he was upset at his players. And for him to get that discipline that Stroh offered, both in football and baseball, I think really helped him at that time in the 1970s. And obviously, high school sports has changed. And I don't know if Darryl Stroh could exist today because he was so tough. But it was interesting developing and seeing how that played out.
Who were some of those players coming up over the next several years after Elway that drew those comparisons?
Well, clearly, if we're talking football, that was a difficult task. We had a lot of good quarterbacks those years. Tom Ramsey was there, Jay Schrader. In fact, I saw Jay Schrader play John Elway in a high school game, 2 future Super Bowl quarterbacks. So that was kind of amazing. They played in the old tiebreaker, the Palisades and Granada Hills. They tied after the end of regulation, and the LA Unified used this crazy tiebreaker situation where you won the game depending on where the ball was at the end of like 6 plays. So if it was beyond the 50-yard line, you won. I think Granada Hills won that game. But there were some great quarterbacks in those years. Tom Tunnicliffe from Burroughs. Van Nuys had a great player. So it was all about quarterbacks that year. But in the 80s, you had so many great baseball players. That's why I love baseball so much. Every year you would have somebody who would end up being a major leaguer. In 1982, I saw Brett Sabering throw a no-hitter at Dodger Stadium. And a couple years later, he won a World Series for the Kansas City Royals. He was a Cy Young Award winner. So I'm kind of spoiled about baseball. I got to see Jack McDowell in high school, Notre Dame. This guy was so intimidating that the umpire, he would fight with the umpires literally on the mound.
As a high school student.
Right, and he would growl at them, and he was the toughest competitor you would ever want. And that's why he became such a good baseball player, a pitcher for the White Sox, another Cy Young Award winner. It was funny because after he won the Cy Young, I knew his brother, who used to be the head coach at Notre Dame, and they sent me a very nice plaque of the Cy Young award, and with him signing it, "Thank you, Eric." And that's the one thing that I have up on my house that I really enjoy, because he was an amazing athlete. Could have been a quarterback, could have been anything. But that's the type of was happening in the 80s. We were having one future major leaguer after another come out of the San Fernando Valley.
And you've obviously had the pleasure of seeing several of these players, whether it's baseball, football, basketball, before they make it big. Now, when you're covering in high school an Elway, a Saberhagen, a Russell Westbrook, do you know at the time what you're looking at? Do you know at the time that these players are going to be destined for greatness?
I would say that sometimes, but other times not. They just get a lot better. You can't immediately say, I mean, that's one of the things in the Little League fathers always say, my son or my daughter's going to be a future star. And you don't know that. It all depends on work ethic and how much they grow or don't grow. You know, a lot of people are really good in Little League, but then they stop growing when they get to high school. But there's every once in a while a couple that are pretty extraordinary that you think that they're going to be great. I mean, always thought LaMelo Ball was going to be probably the best of the balls because he shot the best. He was the most relaxed under pressure. I remember him at Chino Hills in his in the CIF state championship game. He's only a freshman, and before the tip-off, he's yawning. Here at in the NBA arena, he's just yawning before the opening tip-off of the most important game of the year. So he really knew how to relax, and I think it's important to be able to relax under pressure in a championship game. Now, other people say he was just tired starting. I just think he was so relaxed, and as you well know, everybody's seen him, you could see how relaxed he is in dealing with things. So I think that's an important level. But I think I enjoy identifying kids before everybody knows of them, so I can follow them and watch and see if they turn out. Some have made it all the way. Others have not. So it all depends on the parental help, whether they have good role models, and whether they can overcome obstacles. Because even the best players are going to face an adversity at some point, and we have to see if they're going to be able to come back from that. Look at LaMelo Ball. He had to leave Chino Hills, went to Lithuania, and he had to deal with his father, who was getting negative connotations, but he kept going, and so good for him. And who knows how far he's going to go now in the NBA.
And that's actually one thing that I was going to ask is when obviously, if you're playing at that level for such a high-profile program, you have talent. But when it comes to the talent, not even necessarily the talent, but just the ability to really succeed at the D1 college and professional level, what has been the differentiating factor, the thing that these guys all have in common, the ones that make it?
Well, I can tell you in various sports. Let me start with baseball, because I feel most comfortable in being able to identify a future major leaguer who's a pitcher, most of all, because unlike the scouts, I don't look for velocity as the determining factor. I don't know why they continue to, they throw 90, they're going to be a star. It's not that. It's being able to throw strikes. Jeff Suppan, Crespi High, an example. I thought he was the best pitcher I've ever seen because he threw strikes and he was 89 to 90. And I'll never forget that year when he was going to get drafted. He was making sarcastic remarks. Some scouts were saying he didn't throw hard enough. And I was laughing with him. I mean, the Boston Red Sox made him a draft pick, and he'd go on and be a great pitcher for many years and won a National League MVP. It's about throwing strikes. Saberhagen threw strikes. Every pitcher, McDowell threw strikes. Every pitcher that I go out and see, I look for what their control is. Trevor Bauer was terrific in high school at Hart High because he threw strikes. So it's so unusual. Hunter Green at Sherman Oaks, Notre Dame. Now, this is a guy who threw 101 miles an hour, but I wasn't necessarily sold on him because he was a little bit wild at times, and his ball was real straight. I thought that everybody he would have a chance if he continued to develop and maybe developed another pitch. And sure enough, he came here at the Dodger Stadium, and the most remarkable thing about him when he was through all those pitches, I believe it was 38 over 100, he didn't walk anybody. I mean, he improved so much, and so now I'm convinced he's going to be a really good pitcher. But at that time, everybody was all about velocity, and I'm not big on velocity. I just think command is way more important than velocity.
Talking more broadly about the Southern California sports scene as a whole, so the CIF Southern section, that encompasses most of LA County and the counties south of it. 581 teams make up that section, and so many of them are stacked with future pros and have been for a while. What is it about the Southern California high school sports scene that makes it so uniquely dominant over the last several decades?
Well, clearly it's the weather. You're able to practice and play year-round in a variety of sports. And let's not forget about the LA City section, the LA Unified. They used to be better than the Southern section. Unfortunately, many of those parents have now moved into the Southern section areas, and so their kids are going there. And the decline has really been critical. I mean, Dorsey was battling Long Beach Poly for most players sent to the NFL out of high schools. But that's all deteriorated because the LA Unified has kind of deteriorated in enrollment and other things. So that's a whole nother story is what's happened in the season, because they've had great athletes out in baseball. You had Hall of Famers Eddie Murray and Ozzie Smith out at Locke. You have Don Drysdale out of Van Nuys. It can go on and on. In football, there's been great players, basketball, Gilbert Arenas, and some others. Now, as far as the Southern section, you know, it just depends on the area. It encompasses so much. And you're talking about from Long Beach to San Clemente. So it goes on and on, whether it's swimming and track and field. There's just so many tremendous athletes. And that's, again, why I've kept doing this for so long. It seems like every year we get a new person to do well in a particular sport, whether it's male or female. We had Cheryl Miller, Riverside Poly in basketball, Lisa Leslie out of Morningside in women's basketball. So we produce so many great athletes because I just think of the weather, and California is the biggest state.
And it's not even just the caliber of the athletes that are currently playing now. It's the caliber of the athletes that are coming back as coaches as well. You mentioned Dorsey football. Their head coach now is Stephon Johnson. USC fans might remember him as the great running back from the mid-2000s. Over at Sierra Canyon baseball, you've got Jerry Royster. Talk about some of the guys that our viewers might know as athletes who are now back on the scene here as coaches.
Yeah, that's one of the important things that have helped matters is coming back and serving your community. And I think that's been an important development in recent years, that people want to come back and help the kids where they were before. One of the great contributors was Jim Bonds, who played at UCLA and then came back as head coach at St. Francis. He passed away in 2020. Dean Harrington took over for him at St. Francis. He was a great quarterback. But you have professionals that are definitely coming back. Sierra Canyon, their basketball coach, Andre Chevalier, was a great player at Cleveland High and came back and do that. So across Southern California, I think it's mostly, there's a lot of baseball players that have decided to come back. And you know what? The private schools pay a lot of money to hire coaches. So it's an opportunity. This past, recently, Harvard Westlake lost its high school water polo coach, who decided to become the head coach at Cal. I've never heard, it's very rare for a high school coach to make that jump from head coach to head coach in college. But that's happening in Southern California, and Harvard Westlake just hired an assistant coach at UCLA to be its head coach. So we have the jump from high school to college to be head coach, and we have the jump down from from college assistant to be a head high school coach because the money is pretty well at certain private schools. So,
well, and I would imagine that because the caliber of play is so high, it makes the transition easier if you want to jump from high school to college, because of course there's a very, very big difference between a high school player and a college player. But here the difference, there's a little bit less daylight between the two.
right. And water polo and some other sports like softball and volleyball, you have all the club coaching that's going on. And so you're getting chances to work with also USA Development. Water polo coaches are working with USA Development, so they're at a high level. So, yeah, they could easily jump in. They know all the players, so recruiting isn't a big deal either. So there's certain sports, because of the rise of club sports, that you can make that transition pretty easy.
We talk to a lot of coaches, whether they be for high school or college programs or private academies, and that's a topic that comes up a lot, is player development and really you could call it professionalization of youth and high school sports. What has been your impression of the various opportunities that are now available for player development that have popped up?
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest change, and it's going on right now. I mean, Newbury Park had the greatest cross-country distance runners probably in history, and they're not going to run this coming week in the prelims. They're focusing on out of town competitions that involve college students. So yeah, that's definitely happening. We have basketball players that are deciding to opt out, and baseball and softball, and that's going to be a growing issue. It's only for the elite of the elite, so I don't think it's going to ruin high school sports, but it's definitely going to cause parents to make a decision. Do they want their kids to enjoy the high school experience before they become professional or have to be a business-like? Now, more and more are deciding, wait a minute, let's do this now and let's cut into the high school experience. I don't think that that's a good thing. I mean, do you really want to work your whole life? You might want to have some fun a little bit before you have to become an adult. And so it's going to be pulling people left and right, and there's going to be differing of opinions. We already have this in football with the 7-on-7 things going on, and some people playing year-round football rather than trying track. I hope they saw the NFL draft that the majority of the players are multi-sport athletes. Stop this silliness of year-round football. It's better to get faster running for your track team than doing a meaningless 7-on-7 just because you want to impress some internet guru who wants to rank you with how many stars you have. I mean, it's ridiculous in my opinion, but that's what's happening now.
Yeah, but at the same time, I imagine, I completely get that viewpoint, but at the same time, I would imagine that those types of endeavors go a pretty long way toward getting noticed, getting recruited, and building up your skills so that you are a better player and not just a more noticed player.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, that's an opinion that would have. I think in talking to some college recruiters, they would rather them run track than do a 7-on-7 event just to get some kind of exposure. But again, it's a different of opinion. You can make it different ways, and that's certainly one way of doing it. And the other way is to just keep training and try to impress yourself. If you're like a skill position player, that's where 7-on-7 is good for you.
The changing media landscape definitely does tie into this a little bit. It wasn't that long ago that in order for an athlete to really get noticed, they had to rely on a reporter like yourself picking up their story and running with it in a publication. Now, if you've got a phone, you can be your own reporter. You can be your own PR director. What has the impact of the internet and social media meant for the sports media landscape and for the ability of these athletes to generate their own hype?
And to certainly change things. Clearly, if you're any good, somebody will discover you because there are so many options out for them. That's why I don't understand why parents in high school keep moving their kids around. If you're good, again, they will discover you. But we've entered the age of the transfer portal in various sports and at various levels. We've had the transfer portal in high school for years. Colleges are now discovering it, and the parents, some of them don't like it, others do. And so we're entering this uncertain territory. I think it's affecting high school recruiting, the transfer portal, in a negative way. The media certainly loves it because they want to go out and be considered important in this whole process by mentioning somebody, ranking somebody. I roll my eyes when I see national rankings because I think they're ridiculous. I mean, I can tell you who's best in Southern California, but to try and do it nationally because, again, the fans like it. Okay, I get it. I understand that, but I don't take it seriously. If somebody else wants to take it so serious as why are we not ranked, that's up to them. But clearly nobody knows for sure who is the best nationally. It's just you're just doing it for a fan interest. But clearly the media landscape has changed. I remember the days when I would just run to a phone booth. Does everybody remember what a phone booth is?
I do.
Okay, ran to a phone booth to dictate a story. And I had these 15-pound computers that you had to carry around to try and link to that phone book. And now everybody's got a phone that can get you on the internet. You can go live anywhere in the world. You can use various media platforms to get your message across. And so it's a changing world. But it's still, the bottom line is you need good grades to get to college. You need to have good character. You need to have some talent and skills. And that's the bottom line. And then the next level after that, it really is about becoming a man or a woman with lots of skills. I mean, it's not for everybody. Everybody thinks they're going to be a professional, but it's very hard to get to the highest level and then to stay there.
Well, I want to hear from you, independent of the rankings, independent of anything the national media or these outlets are saying. What are some of the hottest headlines, programs, athletes on the scene right now? If you had a friend in town and they were only here for a week, where would you tell them to go watch a game, and who are you telling them to go see?
I would tell them to go to Harvard-Westlake and go take a look at Elisa Thompson. She's a soccer extraordinaire. She's also probably the fastest girl in the state. She's running track finally, but she was the Gatorade National Player of the Year in soccer as a 10th grader. She wasn't able to run track because of COVID. It was being run at the same time. This year, she's finally getting an opportunity. Her younger sister's going to win a gold medal for the U.S. Under-17 team. So you have the greatest sister combination right now. I expect an NIL deal to be coming shortly because they have a younger sister, too. So that's 3. So
all out of Harvard-Westlake?
Well, 2 of them are there, and the younger one is really young, so they'll be coming up. So as far as individual talent, they're up there at Newbury Park. They've had the number 1 distance runner in Colin Salmon. The younger brothers of Nico Young, who was the Gatorade National Runner of the Year, are there. They're juniors. They're twins. They're going to be up everywhere. In basketball, we just finished Amari Bailey's time at Sierra Canyon. He's going to UCLA. Didn't have a very good senior year, but he was hurt. I think he'll do really well next season for the Bruins. And we have all these great football teams coming up. St. John Bosco, I think, is going to be the number 1 team in Southern California. They have a lot of players back. They got some transfers. You have to look for where the transfers are to kind of decide who's number 1 in Southern California football, because you cannot win a championship without transfer students.
Oh, yeah, and on an individual level, you have 3 of the top 5 recruits in the 2023 class are out of Southern California. They're at Alamitos, Bosco, Long Beach Poly. So this is going to be a fun football season we got coming up here.
Yeah, lots of the quarterbacks are very good this year. Malachi Nelson's going to USC. He's out of Los Alamitos. You have Pierce Clarkson at St. John Bosco going to Louisville, quarterbacks. And, of course, there's a great quarterback at Long Beach Poly. He's headed to Tennessee. Supposedly he got a nice NIL deal. We'll find out about that eventually.
And we just had the NFL draft not too long ago. You had the pleasure of covering several prominent players in that draft. You had Kayvon Thibodeau at Oaks Christian, Drake London, Moore Park, started at USC, Trent McDuffie, Bosco, and Matt Corral at Long Beach Poly. So through watching those guys during their high school careers, and I'm sure you saw a little bit at least of Drake London and Thibodeau when they played in college in the Pac-12, what was your impression of those guys at that level, and how do you see them faring in the NFL?
Well, Kayvon was one of those guys, again, who left the city section. He was with Dorsey, living in South L.A. Suddenly he transfers to Oaks Christian, which is a totally different situation. So he was always going to be a great player if he had the work ethic. He looked the part. He looked 18 when he was 14. And so it was always a question of how hard he was going to work. How hard did he want it? And he started working really hard at Oaks Christian, and he did the same at Oregon. So he has a chance to be really good. But again, he has to keep that attitude and not rest on his laurels. And so we need to see if he's going to keep that development. Drake London is just a terrific athlete, was a great basketball player. Nobody really knew if he was going to be a better basketball player than a football player, but he had a higher upside in football, and that's why he stuck with it.
He even got into a couple of basketball games at SC.
Right, and so that was important. He always told me he wanted to do both, but then he clearly began to do better in football, and that's how you should do it. You should be a multi-sport athlete until you decide what you're better at, and he's a great example of how you do that. Him and his family supported him. They stayed at Moore Park. They could have been recruited by other high schools. They went to their neighborhood school. Matt Corral was a totally interesting story in that he was a kid from Oxnard, blue-collar kid. He went to Oaks Christian. He got into trouble there with in a TMZ moment. He got into a little brawl with another famous athlete whose parents are famous. I'm not going to go into it. And he went to Long Beach Poly. There is no way that I would have bet that he would have stayed at Mississippi for 4 years. Kids from L.A. do not stay in Mississippi. But it tells me how loyal he really is, how determined he really is. And I think he has a chance to do really well because of that toughness that he has out there. And the other one from St. John Bosco, Trent, he went to Servite and then he transferred to St. John Bosco. He really learned how to become a great punt returner at St. John Bosco, went to Washington, and really he interviews really well, and has lots of speed, so I look for him to do well too.
Well, we are going to look out for all of those guys in their upcoming NFL debuts this season. Moving over to the realm of basketball, you've had a chance to cover a lot of guys who now find themselves in the NBA. We talked a little bit ago about covering those Chino Hills teams that had the Ball brothers, that had Onyeka Okongwu on it. Those guys are in the NBA now. LaMelo just won Rookie of the Year last year. What was your experience covering that team and being around those guys?
It was unlike anything other because I had to show up like 2 hours before games just to make sure I get in. Fans would line up just to get in there to see what's happening. It was just a show. It was so different. The score, everybody knew that Chino Hills was going to win, and it was all about the show, and the players wanted to be put on the show. They were entertaining. They thought themselves as entertainers. And so, and then the father, LeVar, would hold court before the game, after the game. He'd do high fives. He'd sign autographs. When this first started out, he wasn't as going crazy as he eventually became, making these crazy comments. As a matter of fact, I liked him a lot because he believed in his kids so much that he was ignoring all the usual ways of getting noticed by going to camps, by sucking up to everybody. He says, my boys are the best. And he would let them do interviews with him not around. He was not concerned what they had said. He didn't watch over them. He let them grow up on their own, trial and error, and that was so unusual in today's day and age. But eventually, when they became so good, he started enjoying the moment of being in the spotlight. That's when he started making predictions. But I'll never forget when LaMelo was still a freshman, he said he's going to be the tallest ball. He's going to be 6'8". Nobody believed him, but that's what he is now. So he really knows what he's talking about. He's a good father, even though he talks a little too much at times. And the boys were great kids. They were front. Lonzo was a terrific leader. He wasn't as vocal as LaMelo is like LeVar. LeVar always said LaMelo is more like me than any of his boys. LiAngelo was a really good shooter, and maybe he wasn't as talented as the other two for whatever reason, but it was very unusual, and they had so many great players. They had four future NBA players in the starting five. They went 35-0, and it was unusual to cover. And the following year, there was all kinds of trouble. But they were part of the 217 semifinals that was unbelievable. They had 4 teams at Galen Center that year, and there were numerous future NBA players in that game. It was Sierra Canyon, Bishop Montgomery, Mater Dei, and Chino Hills.
Wow.
So you had Bobo, you had all the Chino Hills kids, you had Bishop Montgomery, had some players. So, yeah, it was sold out at Galen Center. I've never seen anything like it. People were waiting $500 for tickets on online to try and get in for courtside seats. That was one of the greatest sporting events that I've been to.
Well, and that perfect season for Chino Hills in 2015-16, that cracked your list of the top 10 moments in Southern California high school sports history. We actually had Coach Bake on the show not terribly long ago, a couple months ago. So that team has been called by many the greatest high school team ever. Is that true?
Well, again, you have to have seen all the teams to say that, and I haven't seen all the teams. I can just say among the Southern California teams, it had everything you wanted. You know, a center, good shooters, guards, leadership, a good coach. They played some good teams, and they won every game. I mean, what more can you do? And that's hard to do nowadays where you can travel and stuff. But as far as talent-wise, when you look at what happened after that and see how many players ended up going on to the highest level, you'd have to say that that's right up there.
Well, now we've got Bronny and the Sierra Canyon team and all the great talent on that team that you've been around for the last couple of years. Is there a similar buzz around him and that squad?
I know everybody likes to compare Sierra Canyon to Chino Hills, but I really don't think it's a comparison. Chino Hills players were really from their neighborhood area. Sierra Canyons come from all over in all kinds of states. The chemistry is not the same. I mean, that Chino Hills team had chemistry. The Ball brothers got along with everybody. They made passes. Again, they were about entertaining and winning. The Sierra Canyon kids sometimes they're all about wanting to play, and that's what's been a problem there at times. You know, at other times they've won state titles because they were able to put all that talent together and put aside their egos and win, and that's what you have to do when you put together an all-star team, and that's what's been happening at Sierra Canyon. So they're fine. They have good players. Bronny James, at times, I think that he's going to be a good player. Other times, I haven't been impressed. You know, he's been hurt, and he's been inconsistent, and if he's ever going to get to the NBA, he's got to reach a level of consistency.
Well, and Bronny specifically is going to be an interesting case as far as the NBA goes, specifically talking about the rules regarding who is eligible to be drafted. There's been a lot of buzz about allowing high school players to once again declare for the NBA draft straight out of their senior year, get rid of the one and done rule. You've been around a lot of these guys. How would you rate their readiness, whether it's Bronny or the Mobley brothers or the Balls or any of these guys that you've seen in recent years?
I still believe that 1 year of college is a minimum requirement to get them prepared for what they're going to face. Again, they're on their own. They're living in a dorm, or they're living with a roommate. They're learning from another coach. They're dealing with pressure of college and interviews. Yeah, it's possible for a select few that maybe they're ready, but it kind of ruins it for others. I don't see a problem. And now that we have these other leagues that are developing, like the overtime league, where you have a choice, you want to make $100,000 before you go. But a lot of people that have picked that have ended up not even being drafted. I mean, so I'm not a big fan of allowing high school basketball players, because it affects others who really shouldn't be going, and it would only help a select few. I mean, Bronny James is not ready for the NBA. I don't care what LeBron says. He had a hard time starting at Sierra Canyon. So let's be honest, he needs to get better before he's ready to go.
During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, admittedly not a lot of live sports to cover, but you put out an article ranking the 13 greatest Southern California high school athletes of all time. We already talked about number one on that list, John Elway. A couple of other interesting notes that I thought were interesting about that list. Of the 13, there are 3 women on that list, Allison Felix, Marion Jones, Cheryl Miller, all tremendous stars. Your tenure as a sports writer runs relatively parallel to the implementation of Title IX. So you've had a front row seat to the evolution of women's and girls' athletics since that time. And what does that evolution look like from your perspective?
Well, it's definitely changed. In the early days when girls were allowed to play sports, the differences between the teams was so much that it really brought concern. I mean, teams were beating teams by 50 and 60 points, and that didn't make it fun at all. And so in the last 10 years in particular, the level of play has evened up a lot more. There's still great teams that are better than others, but I think that's been important that we've seen a system-wide and a nationwide improvement at all levels in all sports. And to be competitive is how you draw fans. And that's why we're seeing a lot more fans to like softball and basketball. That we have more than just a select few great players. We have a lot more great players. And that's been the key, I think, to the development of women's sports. We're also seeing a lot more women coaching. Before it was just men as the head coach of girls' teams and women's teams. Thank goodness the women have decided they want to coach because it's hard. They don't want to, the men spend so much time. It's a dedicated profession, but now women are getting paid a little bit more, and they're also enjoying the moment of coaching. I mean, I had the pleasure of getting to watch at Windward their head girls basketball coach. She just recently went from high school to head coach in the WNBA.
Vanessa Nygaard.
Right. She is the best coach, one of the best coaches, men or women there is, period. So she was a walking head coach for the next level to come along. I was just waiting for somebody to steal her, and Phoenix was fortunate enough to steal her, and she will do a great job there, and she could be an NBA coach. She was that qualified.
Well, and we just talked a little bit about making the jump from high school to college. She skipped that step entirely, went from high school to the WNBA.
Right, and she was ready. She had coached, been an assistant at Stanford briefly, but then she, again, it was that back to the point, Windward paid her to be a teacher and a coach, so it was worthwhile financially for her to go to high school. But now she has reached the point she wanted to challenge herself at the professional level. So it's fun, and we had another one. Noelle Quinn went from Bishop Montgomery to the Seattle Storm. So the women are getting that opportunity like the men have, and that's a positive development.
And there's been an increased spotlight on women's athletics in recent years for a variety of reasons, positive and negative. You touched on one of them, the highly prominent individuals who are coming into these coaching positions, but also more hot button issues pertaining to equality and access to these sports. So in your opinion, what do the next several years or decades look like in women's sports from a standpoint of the challenges and achievements that are on the horizon?
Right. I think the big challenge is to try and get more fans out to the events. It's still a big gap, between a championship in boys basketball and a championship in girls basketball. Softball has been able to grow a little bit faster and catch up to baseball. But I don't know, that's going to be the challenge of how you get fans to come out into the massive level like a football game at some of these other levels. And that's going to have to be on marketing too. Or maybe you get somebody that's so good everybody's going to want to do that. Obviously, Sierra Canyon has a game changer in Watkins, and she's only a junior. She's coming back next season, and she will change the face of women's basketball at the collegiate level and then at the NBA. She's a future number one pick at a level that we will never have seen in our lifetime.
She's got an NIL deal, I believe, too, right?
She hired Clutch to get her some NIL deals. So that's unique in itself, and she deserves it. She plays the game of basketball different than any other woman. She can dribble, she can shoot, she rebounds, and as she keeps getting better, she will just keep going up and up.
Another thing that I noticed going through that list is of the 13 athletes that you mentioned, 4 of them are track and field athletes. And that's not a sport that a ton of people around here talk about. But why is track and field really Southern California's hidden gem?
Well, it's the Olympic Games. Obviously, we talk about it every 4 years. And track and field is important for the Olympics. And so you try to develop people. We have lots of speed out in Southern California. That's our forte. I don't know why, but whether it's women or men, we have speed burners. And that's been fun for me to see some of the great athletes in track and field through the years. Quincy Watts, I got to cover him at halftime, Woodland Hills, and then he won an Olympic gold in Barcelona, and it was so fun to be at home cheering him on from that TV set.
And he's another one of those guys who's come back as a coach. Now he's the head coach of the program at USC.
Right. Great kid, and you could tell that he was going to do big things on and off the field, and he's still doing that. Michael Norman was tremendous at Vista Marietta. I still think he's going to win a gold medal. He really helped elevate high school track and field when he was running there. And we have so many. Marion Jones was very good. At least Allison Felix, obviously one of the best ever, is about to retire. She went to then known as LA Baptist and then USC. So we have plenty of athletes, and they're going to be coming up down through the years. And again, the great athletes inspire others. And so I think that we will keep improving in that area. But the world is tough. There's a lot of great athletes around the world. So, you know what I'm looking forward to is the Olympic Games in Southern California in 2028.
Absolutely.
So I think that date, as we start to look forward to, will help inspire a lot more of young athletes to try and get good enough to be able to participate. I know as a sports writer, it may keep me from retiring if I can be around until 2028, because I covered the 1984 Olympics here, and that was fun. I covered the baseball competition at Dodger Stadium that year, and that was when it first started, and Will Clark was on the team, so that was a fun time.
Will the Thrill.
Yep.
So I want to go back to another moment that you had the chance to cover back in 2003. This is another one that cracked your list of the top moments in Southern California sports history. You got to see a young LeBron James when he was playing with St. Vincent St. Mary's in Akron. They came and played Mater Dei at Pauley Pavilion. What was that atmosphere like?
Well, that was a case where I kind of screwed up in my great ability to evaluate, because I know LeBron James, everybody was saying he's the greatest ever, and he didn't even shoot the ball very well. So I wasn't very convinced that he really was the greatest ever. All I remember is that in the pre-talk, they had it at Lowry's, and his mom went out and got him, I think it was a burger from Burger King instead of eating the prime rib for LeBron. So, but he was a nice kid, and I enjoyed the fact that they pretty much sold out Pauley Pavilion for a high school game. And so that was the time when you could see what the celebrityhood was going to be like down the road. This was the first time that ESPN, one of the first times ESPN was doing a national broadcast of a high school event. And so that was the beginning of the changing that was going to take place in a lot of different sports. But, yeah, he had lots of talent, but he wasn't a great shooter at that time, and I give him credit. He worked his butt off to become a great three-point shooter, and that's something that I learned, that just because you don't look good in one particular game, you need to watch another time, and you have to also understand that somebody can get better.
17 years later, we talked a little bit ago about Bronny. In 2020, you got to see him match up against modern day, obvious parallels between that game and the one 17 years prior. Did you notice any similarities between father and son, or between the atmosphere of the games themselves?
No, it was just, again, everybody wants to see celebrities in the audience. Fans show up to Sierra Canyon games to see who shows up with them. They don't necessarily watch the games per se. And again, I have to make sure that I don't make a mistake on Bronny like I probably did on his father. He's capable of getting better, and so I have to be patient on that. But I don't like the fact that everybody's assuming that he's going to be in the NBA, because he's not there yet, you know. But that's his father. Obviously, every father dreams and wants the best for their kids, and so he wants to play with them, and that's great. But he obviously has to get better, and maybe he will, and I hope he does, because that would be one heck of a moment to see LeBron playing with his son in the NBA.
Do you remember what Bronny had for his post-game meal?
No, Bronny's has his own bodyguard, so we don't get to talk to him, let alone stay close to him. That would be the difference. I think I don't remember LeBron having a bodyguard when he was around in Southern California. But again, I understand that we're in a different year. People want to protect there's so much going on with social media. You definitely want to protect your children.
So I want to get into an honor that was bestowed upon you a couple of years ago. In 2019, you were inducted into the Southern California Interscholastic Basketball Coaches Association Hall of Fame. That was a mouthful. I'm glad I got that out. Anyway, you look at the list of people that you now share that honor with. Coaches, ADs, officials, media. John Wooden is an inductee into that same Hall of Fame, as is Mark Track, former collegiate women's basketball coach. When you look at the names that are on that roster of Hall of Famers and you see your name among them, how much does that honor mean to you?
It's always an honor to be in any Hall of Fame, and I appreciate it, but I'm not big into awards or other things. I just enjoy my job. I mean, I've been paid for more than 45 years to write about sports. That's to me the best job of all. It's not really a job. It's just entertainment for me. It gives me great satisfaction to tell other people's story, and then to hear back from them just a simple thank you is great. And so I just like to inspire and find stories of people overcoming adversity and obstacles, and trying to use them as example for others to overcome adversity and obstacles. So that's kind of what I look forward to.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I don't think a lot of people understand about the media is, yes, of course, you're there to find the story, report the story, but media members really do make an impact in the lives of these young athletes. What's some of the feedback you got? I know you told a story about an autograph with a personalized message you received, but what are some of the stories of the actual impacts that you've been able to see yourself having through this job?
Well, it's always fun to see, again, who fulfills their dreams. So many people nowadays, it's all about just getting a scholarship, and I understand that it costs a lot of money to go to college. People can be in debt for many years if they don't get a scholarship. But I am not writing about somebody to get a scholarship. I hate to break the news to them. I'm writing to tell their story of something positive that they're doing. And, if it inspires somebody else, that's where I feel good. When I write a story, I get upset if only the person that I'm writing about the story is happy with. I have to find stories that resonate with as many times readers as I can, and that's the challenge I have. I have to find stories out there that people want to read, from Long Beach to Antelope Valley, that tells a story that they could relate to. And so that's kind of my challenge. The other day, I was out at Hart High School to watch a baseball game, and It ended with a grand slam in the bottom of the 8th inning. Pretty extraordinary moment. And the kid who did it is one of the best players in Southern California, but he was miserable the whole day. He struck out twice. He popped out. He was not doing anything. And so baseball is about redemption. You don't get a hit every time up. You strike out. You screw up. But you have that chance to get it all back. And that was so fun for me to see that happening. I was thinking about it early in the game. I said, all right, he looks terrible, but I think at some moment he's going to make an impact. And there it was, the final play. It could have been his final high school game ever, but he did it. He came through, and that's kind of the thrill of high school sports or any sports, that you get a second chance, and he delivered. And so that's made it so fun for me to tell that story.
I can't think of a better place to leave it than that. Eric Sondheimer, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. Where can we follow you, read your content, learn more about you?
Well, hopefully you will subscribe to the Los Angeles Times online like I do. They have a deal going on, $1 for 6 months. Come on, you can afford that. And also LAT Sondheimer for Twitter. So thank you very much.
All right, Eric Sondheimer, the preeminent voice in Southern California high school sports. Thank you for coming on the Cannon Sports Podcast. We will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and follow on Instagram at Cannon Sports, TikTok at Cannon Sports Official, and of course, cannonsports.com for all your sporting goods needs.